Okay, so let's dig into what actually happened since we were lied to by the Biden administration over and over and over again, who was only worried about covering their own rear ends. What happened? What happened at Abbey Gate? What happened with this ISIS guy? Joining me now, somebody who knows a lot about this. She wrote, well, Abbey Gate, Know Thy Enemy. It is out now. Sarah Adams. Sarah, just talking about this entire thing drives me freaking up the wall. First of all, who are you? What's your background? And introduce yourself to the folks, please.
Yeah, just as a quick overview, I'm a former CIA targeter. We actually carried out an investigation identifying the terrorist who did the attack in Benghazi back in 2012. And since then, we've been doing a lot of different investigations. We did Abbey Gate, we did the October 7th Hamas attack. So it's just a continuation of our investigations.
Okay, so tell me about this investigation on Abbey Gate. Whatever you're allowed to tell me, of course. Sources, how you did it, what you found. Just lay it all on us.
Yeah, well, really simply, we weren't even planning to do this investigation. And then April of last year, the CENTCOM put out theirs, and they had not even found the true name of the suicide bomber. And so I was like, well, how hard can it be? And so we actually did some initial work and we found his name within 3 weeks. And that's when I was like, okay, we have to start investigating this ourselves because the government's not doing it. So, as a lot of people know, we've been running networks for the last 10 years to focus on the Benghazi side of things. But after Kabul fell, all the terrorists shifted back to Afghanistan. So all of our networks now are in Afghanistan. So it's actually pretty easy to collect because everybody's intermingling in the country. Even in terrorist camps now, it's not like just an Al Qaeda camp. There's 5 different terrorist groups in that camp. So they've all kind of come together.
Okay, first of all, who are the five terrorist groups and why couldn't CENTCOM get answers?
Yeah, when we talk about Abbey Gate, it's really interesting. It was mostly plotted by Sirajuddin Haqqani, who's the Taliban's Minister of Interior, but most Americans know him as the head of the Haqqani network, and then Sanaullah Ghaffari, who is the head of the Islamic State Khorasan province. But as a lot of people know, to commit a terrorist attack, you have to get a fatwa issued, right? So they went to the Taliban's political commission to do so. But one person who was in the meeting to approve the attack was Abdullah bin Laden, the son of Hamza bin Laden. Okay. So now we have ISKP, the Taliban's political commission, and Al Qaeda, right? So that's already 4 groups involved. So it's very frustrating that it's really been covered up. A lot of Americans were kind of taught that this was like a lone suicide attack, right? And nothing like this. It came out of nowhere when actually the planning is very meticulous.
Okay, I, can you elaborate a little bit more on ISIS-K working with the Taliban? Because you get so many conflicting reports on this that they're actually against each other, that they're fighting. ISIS is fighting Al Qaeda. They're all fighting the Taliban. No, they're working together. What is the true story?
The true story, it really goes back to 2015. 2015, they basically put a council together called the Shura Mujahideen. And that council was ISIS, the Taliban, and a number of other local groups to take on Afghan security forces and the Afghan National Army. So that's when the groups first came together to work on a joint cause. But this iteration started in 2019 as Sirajuddin Haqqani was seeing the Doha deal put into place and realizing he couldn't send his own suicide bombers and attackers to do attacks. He needed a proxy. So he actually took Ghaffari, who I told you is leading ISKP, from the Haqqani network, seeded him into ISIS to use him as a proxy. And so that's now been going on about 6 years. So he's basically just a front man for the Haqqani network inside of ISIS.
Okay, what's the red umbrella?
Yeah, the red umbrella is simply it was one of those visual markers at Abbey Gate. So you knew how to get to like the Marines to get out safely, right? If you're an American or if you had paperwork to get in the gate. So it was one of those symbols of hope. You knew when you got to it, there'd be a US Marine or some sort of military person who would like take care of you and help you out. And so a lot of people in the crowd obviously looked at this as a beacon of hope and I can maybe get out of Afghanistan, right? If I can get to these Marines.
Okay, what do we know about the bomber?
So the bomber is really interesting. He, was an ISIS suicide bomber that first actually deployed to India, and he was supposed to do an attack in New Delhi. He got caught by the Indians, deported, ended up in Bagram. So he was in prison actually, when we were in country, but then he was released the night of August 15th by the Taliban because ISKP chose him and two others kind of as a suicide bomber cell to be the attackers. And he ultimately was the one asked to do the operation. So he'd been long in ISIS for probably about 6, 7, 8 years by that point. So well trained.
Okay, so could you explain why the Indians would deport somebody who was in their country getting ready to incinerate a bunch of women and kids instead of throwing him in some dank Indian dungeon somewhere?
Yeah, that would have been better. Unfortunately, he was Afghan, but we believe the CIA tipped the Indians off, and the CIA requested he be brought to Bagram. And then, of course, they had no end game for him, as you can see, and he ended up released. Like a lot of the terrorists we caught over the years, unfortunately, they really only spend time in prison 5 to 7 years for the most part.
Okay, so the goal of the Abbey Gate attack, was it just chaos, embarrassment? Was it just to kill people? What was the goal? What do we think?
The goal was actually to harm our troops. If you actually look at some of the people involved, I talked about the masterminds, but there's a very interesting terrorist involved who helped move the bomber to Kabul, and he's the son of Mullah Daduda Lang. That was basically one of the most senior operations we ever carried out against a Taliban commander when we killed his father, right? So there's also some personal retribution inside of this attack that really nobody's been honest about, with those who've been impacted.
Okay. What could we have done to prevent this attack? Could we have prevented it? I mean, obviously, not giving up Bagram would have been the best way to prevent it, but is there a way we could have secured a civilian airport to have prevented this?
The way they did it, no, because they announced the evacuation on August 13th. The planning for the attack started on August 14th. We had such a hasty, thrown together evacuation plan. There were so many holes in it that it was so easy to take advantage of. And then our government made our troops be on the other side of the Taliban. It was the Taliban who did the external security at the airport. So because of how we set that up, we had no plan, and then we relied on the Taliban. Unfortunately, our troops and all those innocent people were sitting ducks, right? Now, if they would have planned a real evacuation months before, like they should have, it would have been a different situation, but not in the way the hasty withdrawal happened.
Did we try to cover up all this stuff afterwards? Our government, I mean.
Yeah, I 100% think they did. First off, our government definitely covered up the Haqqanis were involved, right? I just told you Siraji Haqqani was one of the masterminds. Obviously, most people know they covered up a drone strike on an innocent, aid worker. They were only told to tell the truth about it when it got leaked to the press. And then, as I told you, one of Bin Laden's sons, was involved in the plotting behind this. That alone shows that they've covered up. And even the commander who told the suicide bomber, "Hey, you're in a good enough spot to kill enough troops." That's the son-in-law of Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was the current head of Al-Qaeda at the time. So yes, this has been completely covered up. And they just want you to believe this is an ISIS lone wolf, right? Like they did after the New Orleans attack in January. And they just want you to be happy with that explanation. And it's not true. Multiple groups work together on this, and they're planning other things. And you need to be honest with the public so they can see these tactics and be prepared for what's coming.
Planning other things?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, when we abandoned Afghanistan, it became the base again for international terrorism, and we stopped actually doing strikes there. The last over the horizon strike was July of 2022. So for 3 years, the terrorists have been able to plot, plan, train unabated. So they've been now deploying people to Europe, to the United States, and they are planning another 9/11 style attack in the United States. And we're easily able to get in over our borders, but also our visa system, as most people know, is very weak. And a lot of people get approved who shouldn't be approved and who hate this country. And so we have a lot of holes that we need to fill too.
What about all those refugees we brought in when the Biden administration just started chucking Afghanis in the back of C-130s?
Yeah, so that's a whole nother issue. A huge percentage of them were never vetted. They never worked for the US government. In one situation, there was a girl I rescued and she got to Ramstein and she called her brother from Ramstein. He's like, "How'd you get a phone?" She's like, "Oh, I'm using one of the US Army members. He's using me as his interpreter." He said, "Isn't the place full of interpreters?" And she said, "No, we couldn't find any." She said, "I'm talking to these people. They never worked for the US government. They won't look at me. They're too extreme. They won't speak to a woman. They speak no English." In another case, one of my friends was an air marshal and he flew a flight from Ramstein to DC. In the middle of the flight, they got called and said, "Oops, we let a terrorist on the plane, but don't worry, you can still land in DC with him." So they know they brought terrorists in, and it's a huge problem. And we do need to go back and re-vet everybody brought out in that hasty withdrawal because we did bring in the enemy.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.